Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a dim, wood-paneled bedroom in 1870s London. The wallpaper smells faintly of coal smoke and rosewater. You're tucked into a too-short bed, your head resting on a lumpy horsehair pillow. A single gaslight hisses softly in the corner, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Outside, the sound of iron wheels on cobblestone echoes faintly. It's very late and very quiet, and you are, unfortunately, extremely awake. The air is still and thick warm, in a way that clings. You shift under the wool blanket, which smells like it's never fully dried. Somewhere in the walls, a mouse chews at something it shouldn't. You consider counting sheep, but remember that in Victorian England, even sheep came with rules. Your eyes drift to the bedside table, where a ceramic jug of something pale and watery waits. It's not gin, it's not milk, it's boiled lettuce. Yes, tonight's remedy is a tepid glass of lacticarium, what Victorian folks liked to call lettuce opium, supposedly calming, mildly soporific, slightly terrifying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough to type, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stare at the lettuce water again. It's faintly green, like pond runoff. The instructions said to boil it for exactly 8 minutes, long enough to extract the sleepy virtues, but not so long it becomes bitter. There's no sugar, no honey, not even a twist of lemon, just wet lettuce, steeped in its own ambition. You sip it, it tastes ... like sadness. You lie back, you wait, you ponder your choices. Victorian insomnia, after all, wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a condition, a crisis, sometimes even a moral failing. To be sleepless in this era wasn't simply unfortunate. It was almost shameful. You were clearly overthinking, or overstimulated, or secretly harboring an impure thought. That's what they'd tell you. The middle of the night becomes a time for guilt, pacing, and questionable remedies. Your room if you're lower class, and terribly drafty if your upper offers no comfort. There's no mattress memory foam here, just a thin pad over creaky slats, stuffed with hay or wool, occasionally with a dried lavender sachet to mask the smell of mildew. You press your face against the pillow again. There's a button inside it, somehow. It pokes you every time you turn your head. Victorian bedrooms had a vibe, and not always a sleepy one. You've got thick curtains to keep out prying eyes and some of the street lamp glare, but not much insulation from the noise. And yes, though it's charming, in theory, the gentle hiss of a gaslight isn't that relaxing. When you know it might be leaking carbon monoxide, historians still argue whether the air is terrible sleep. Hygiene was by ignorance or sheer stubbornness. After all, they had access to opium, valerian root, and very heavy curtains. And yet, insomnia reigned supreme, especially in cities. Perhaps it was the industrial anxiety, or the pickled cabbage at dinner, or the general gloom the hours drag. You pull the wool blanket higher, then there's the nightclothes. If you're lucky, you're wearing a flannel nightshirt, possibly embroidered with your initials. If you're not, you're in something closer to a potato sack. Either way, you're probably overheating and yet still somehow have cold feet, which is ironic, considering Victorian wisdom insisted that warm feet meant restful sleep. You glance again at the lettuce water. Maybe a second sip would help. It doesn't. To distract yourself, You count ceiling cracks. The plaster is flaking, probably due to dampness. Maybe due to the uninsulated attic full of mothballs and forgotten hat boxes. You ponder whether anyone has ever fallen asleep counting plaster cracks. It seems statistically unlikely. Eventually, you start to hear the neighborhood sounds. The city never quite sleeps. A distant hoofbeat, someone shouting drunkenly about a chimney, a cart rattling by with what you hope are potatoes, and not something more Victorianly tragic. You sigh. This truly is the height of 19th century restlessness. You are physically exhausted, but your brain is doing laps around the gas lamp. You try to focus on your breathing. Inhale, exhale. Think of something calm. Maybe a meadow, or a library. Or a meadow inside a library, why not? A clock chimes somewhere. To bells. Only 4 hours to go until sunrise. And yet something stirs. Not in the room your bowels are safe, but in your consciousness. A kind of amused resignation. You realize, perhaps for the first time, that the Victorians tried everything to sleep. Lettuce tea, sleep hats, charcoal under the bed, and, most of all, beliefness, determined belief that somehow, with the right number of boiled leaves, you too could trick your brain into forgetting the coal soot, the clanging streetcars, and the existential dread of empire. So you lean back, you close your eyes, and just maybe you start to drift. The problem, at its root, is that the Victorians didn't see sleeplessness as a condition of the body but of the soul. You roll over in your stiff little bed, your nightshirt clanging uncomfortably where it shouldn't, and think about how every doctor, and well-meaning aunt in your life believes your insomnia is entirely your own fault. A weak constitution, they say, a restless spirit, too much reading, not enough fresh air, and heaven forbid you ate cheese after 6 o'clock. The prevailing idea in the 19th century was that to sleep poorly was to live poorly. Sloth and laziness were obviously out of the question, but so was overthinking. A busy mind was a dangerous mind, the type that might read radical literature, start asking questions about property rights, or worst of all, take up poetry in polite society. Insomnia was whispered about in much the same tone as gout or unchaperoned walks. Unfortunate, unclean, and probably avoidable if you'd only had better parents. And of course, there were the moralists. These charming folks often claimed that late-night wakefulness was a symptom of hidden vice. If your conscience were clean, they argued, you'd be asleep by now. No pressure. You lie back and imagine what sort of vice they think you've committed. Too much tea, admiring your own ankles in a looking glass, reading Mary Shelley by candlelight. 1. 1874 pamphlet boldly claimed that idle musing at improper hours invites the devil, which is a very harsh way to describe lying in bed and wondering whether fish can yawn. Historians still debate whether these anxieties were rooted more in religion or in class structure. After all, the working poor often lived in single rooms, with no privacy, sleeping in shifts or tucked together like Tetris blocks. For them, insomnia wasn't a moral failing, it was background noise. But for the middle and upper classes, where leisure met shame in a delicate waltz, it was different. Sleeplessness was a sign of imbalance. You had time to worry, so clearly you were worrying incorrectly. Even the doctors got in on the act. Early Victorian physicians were fond of writing flowery prescriptions that often amounted to stop thinking. So much. One widely distributed guidebook recommended removing mental excitation with gentle walks, tepid baths, and avoiding novels with too many exclamation points. You glance toward your bedside table and the dog-eared copy of Frankenstein. 3 exclamation points on the first page alone. You sigh. Damned if you do, doomed if you don't. And yet, they meant well, some of them, anyway. Sleep was seen as restorative, holy, even a little magical. The kind of state in which one might glimpse the divine or purge the humors. Losing it meant losing balance, and balance was everything, which is how you found yourself in this mess. You sip from the lettuce water again. It hasn't improved. Your body, wrapped in a cocoon of linen and self-doubt, tosses lightly. Maybe the blankets are too heavy, or not heavy enough, or perhaps there are simply too many pillows. Victorians did love their pillows, after all, even when they were made of sawdust and colonial gilt. You reach for a book, but remember the pamphlet's warning, no strong emotions, that rules out fiction. And the Bible, and probably cookbooks too, if you're prone to late-night toast cravings. Instead, you try to focus on your breathing again. 1.2.3. Wait, did you leave the downstairs candle burning? This thought spirals into a new one. Would your house burn faster or slower due to the damp wallpaper paste? You mentally rehearse escape routes. You try to remember if you latched the cellar door. You were, in short, perfectly Victorian in your ability to catastrophize in a highly detailed and unnecessarily poetic fashion, and you're not alone. The sleepless mind of this era became such a common trope that entire essays were written about it. Charles Dickens himself suffered from insomnia, often walking the London streets from midnight until dawn. He described the city at night as both thrilling and desolate, full of gaslight, solitude, and the lingering smell of stewed eel. Imagine bumping into Dickens while you're both doing laps around the garden at 3 a.m. He'd probably ask about your lettuce, water, and then quote himself out loud. The truth is, the Victorian relationship with sleep was complicated. They feared it. They revered it. They chased it desperately and then sabotaged it completely. They built entire rituals around preparing for it, from brushing hair exactly 100 times to praying on specific types of rug. They insisted on absolute silence in some households and then built beds that creaked like symphony orchestras. They slept in flannel but with drafty windows, next to ticking clocks and hissing lamps. Historians still argue whether the era's chronic sleep issues were worse than today's. After all, there were no smartphones or LED lights or triple shot, but there were worry stones, melancholic piano concertos, and a steady drip of existential dread fueled by empire and empire-shaped consequences. You sigh again, rolling onto your side. A distant carriage clatters past, probably carrying some poor soul equally sleepless, bundled in an overcoat and self-recrimination. You wonder if you're simply not meant to sleep tonight. Maybe you'll write a letter, or rearrange the silverware drawer, or count how many floorboards creak under your heel. But then again, maybe one more sip of the pickled lettuce water will do the trick. You swirl the pale green liquid in your cup, watching it ripple like the ghost of a salad. You take another sip liquorm vegetal, slightly slimy, and let it sit on your tongue longer than you should. There's a faint bitterness now, as though the lettuce has begun to judge you back. Still, you persist, because this, dear friend, is the era of the great lettuce obsession. Some say it started with the Victorians' fondness for categorizing everything: plants, illnesses, moods, even dreams. Lettuce, in particular, found itself caught between the lines of botany and bedtime. Its Latin name, Lactuca sativa, refers to the milky sap it exudes when cut. To the ever-optimistic Victorians, this milky sap hinted at hidden properties, calming ones, possibly magical ones, or, at the very least, not actively harmful ones. Lacticarium, the name given to this sleep-promoting substance, was quickly extracted, bottled, and sold in apothecaries throughout Britain. Often labelled as lettuce, opium, it was neither lettuce nor opium in any satisfying way, but rather the dehydrated gum scraped from stems, processed into tinctures or powders, and then consumed with the kind of trembling hope only a sleepless person can muster. You imagine walking into one of these pharmacies, the wooden shelves grown under rows of dark glass bottles, each with a label more florid than the last. Soothing lettuce draught. Dr. Lingham's lettuce extract for nervous ladies. Nightly lacticarium compound with the blessings of Queen and Empire. Historians still argue whether Queen Victoria herself ever used it. Some say she favoured lavender poultices and brisk country walks. Others claim her physicians prescribed all manner of herbal nonsense to quiet her nerves after Albert passed. The truth, as always, is somewhere between documented fact and very polite gossip. But whether royalty used it or not, the public believed. Lettuce became the unlikely hero of the sleepless middle class. Articles in household magazines praised its virtues. Clergy even gave sermons suggesting that God had made lettuce especially for the anxious spirit. Which makes you wonder, did Adam and Eve ever fall asleep in the garden, heads resting on romaine? You sip again. Still awful, in a household with means. You might even have a servant tasked with preparing your bedtime lettuce infusion. They'd boil the leaves carefully, ideally, from a garden free of soot and rat strain, the liquid through muslin, and serve it tepid in a delicate porcelain cup. You'd thank them with a nod and a faraway look, as though this were a deeply profound ritual rather than desperate flailing. For the less affluent, lettuce remedies were DIY recipes circulated in pamphlets and letters. Slice a head of lettuce into quarters, one suggests. Boil for 20 minutes. Add no seasonings, for even the spice of salt may excite the brain. Another insists on Roman lettuce only, for common cabbage lettuce shall yield no dream worth having. You imagine following these instructions exactly, sweating over a smoky stove, straining soggy greens, and then sipping in silence while the clock ticks louder and louder. And yes, there were pills too. Ground lettuce concentrate, rolled with flour and a bit of chalk, often mixed with opium to really punch up the bedtime vibes. Though one unfortunate side effect, noted in an 1862 medical journal, was persistent flatulence and a sensation of rootlessness. A rootless Victorian insomniac with the farts. You imagine trying to sleep through that. The best part? Most of these remedies didn't work, or rather, they worked as much as placebo and exhaustion allowed. People kept drinking their lettuce water, convinced that the night they finally fell asleep was due to the mixture and not, say, collapsing from emotional fatigue or listening to a long sermon on Psalm 73. Still, hope is a powerful sedative. You lie back again, lettuce glass now empty. You wonder whether your Victorian self would have tried growing their own. In a small back garden, perhaps tucked between the coal chute and the gooseberry bush, you imagine tiny lettuce seedlings lovingly tended under a grey sky, destined not for salad but for sleepy infusions. And as absurd as it is, there's something weirdly comforting about it. The gentleness, the attempt, the sheer commitment to boiling a vegetable in the name of dreams. Of course, Not all sleep remedies of the time were so gentle. Lettuce was a gateway drug, figuratively, and sometimes literally too. Stronger concoctions, laudanum, morphine, chloral, hydrate. By the end of the century, the sleepy garden remedy would be shoved aside by pharmaceuticals with more teeth. But for a brief, oddly romantic moment, lettuce held court. One doctor even insisted, in a widely circulated letter, that a single leaf of fresh-picked cozed lettuce placed on the chest at night may ease the pulse and soften the heart's whisperings. You're not sure what that means exactly, but it sounds like something someone might whisper before fainting in a gazebo. Historians still debate whether this was sincere herbalism or elaborate metaphor, possibly both, and so you settle again. Under the covers, body still wired, mind now steeped in vegetable lore, you feel no sleepier. But somehow you feel seen, because what is insomnia, really, but a shared human experience stretched across time? From the Egyptian priest counting stars on a temple roof to the Victorian lady sipping her boiled salad in bed, you are part of a long, leafy lineage of people who just wanted to sleep. You close your eyes. Maybe, just maybe, this time it'll work. You've finished your third sip of lettuce water, and still your eyelids refuse to cooperate. Maybe what you need isn't more lettuce, but more options. Because this is Victorian England, and there's no shortage of remedies, some stranger than others for sleeplessen. And where better to find them than in the pages of a catalogue? You imagine yourself thumbing slowly through a thick, crackling booklet by candlelight. The ink smudges slightly on your thumb as you trace down the columns of mail order. Items designed to lull you into dreamland. The heading reads, Restoratives for the Agitated Sleeper. Beneath it, a glorious buffet of Victorian ingenuity awaits. First on the list, lettuce pills, of course. Soft shell capsules for the nervous disposition, lightly dusted in lavender starch. You admire the drawing of a woman sleeping delicately beneath what appears to be a velvet tent, a lettuce sprig drawn symbolically near her temple. Next, laudanum drops. These were the heavy hitters of the time, opium suspended in alcohol, sold freely and used liberally, for headaches, for digestion, for colicky babies, and for anyone, really, who couldn't manage to close their eyes without pondering the collapse of civilization and the cost of chimney sweeps. Historians still debate whether most Victorians knew how addictive it was. Some claim the upper class pretended not to know. Others argue that they absolutely knew and simply didn't care, so long as they were able to drift off without dreaming of unpaid debts or spontaneous combustion. You turn the page. Now we're into the fun stuff. Slumber bonnet for rebalancing the cerebral fluids during midnight distress. A lacy contraption that looks suspiciously like a tea cozy. You imagine strapping that to your scalp and hoping your thoughts trickle back into the proper cranial channels. Further down the page, patent electric sleep slippers. Yes, these were real. Battery-powered footwear meant to send a soothing tingle up the legs and into the spine, thereby inducing drowsiness. Early electrotherapy was all the rage, especially when it involved tingling and vague promises of improved character. Of course, you had to be careful. One gentleman reportedly wore the slippers too long and ended up hallucinating that Queen Victoria had grown wings and a trumpet. He later became a playwright. And let's not forget the ambient sound machines, though they didn't hum or chirp like modern ones. These were wind-up boxes filled with miniature bells, strings, or tiny hammers that mimicked the sound of church choirs or rain hitting glass. The sound lasted approximately 8 minutes before winding down with an aggressive click that startled most users awake. Some households opted instead for human sound machines, a bored cousin or housemaid hired to read dull passages aloud until the sleeper nodded off. Pliny the Elder, insurance policy documents, or outdated train schedules were all fair game. If the reader had a nasal voice and poor punctuation, even better. You smile at the image. A snoring baron, his footman droning, on about the timetables of the 3:15 WOLVERHAMPTON. Next on the page, something called beef tonic with lettuce essence, a syrupy solution of bone broth, and our good friend lacticarium. Marketed as a whole supper in a spoon, it claimed to feed the body, calm the nerves, and encourage soft dreams of lambs. You raise your eyebrows, not nightmares. Soft dreams of lambs. That's oddly specific. Historians still argue whether this obsession with lambs came from biblical associations or the fact that sheep were just generally calming. Either way, it seems like a strange leap from beef to dreams of wool. You imagine ordering one of everything: the lettuce capsules, the slippers, the bonnet, even the electric fork that claims to neutralize night terrors via galvanic stimulation of the wrist. That one feels made up, but you wouldn't bet money against it. There's also a section of soothing accoutrements for children and invalids. Among them, weighted lapdogs, yes, fake ones, ceramic owls that chirp when warm, and pillows, scented with church, incense, and hay. You turn another page. There, in fine print, is a letter from a Mr. F.R. Thistlethwaite of Manchester, describing how he overcame persistent, unrepentant sleeplessness by sleeping inside a small linen closet filled with lavender, beef wax, and brass instruments. He doesn't explain the brass instruments. You don't ask. All of it, every strange object, every absurd tincture drips with the same soft desperation. Please, just let me sleep tonight. You exhale slowly. You can relate, and yet there's a weird kind of coziness to it all. The slippers, the herbal bottles, the careful handwriting promising relief. You picture a household where someone loves you enough to track down a wind-up rain machine and a lettuce poultice just to help you doze off. There's comfort in the effort, in the ritual, in the belief that sleep is not just a necessity, but a craft. Maybe that's what modern life lacks: less melatonin, more absurd bonnets. You roll over, your imaginary catalogue resting softly in your mind, filled with the ghosts of cloves and lavender. Outside your window, the fog thickens slightly. A distant horse snorts and plods down a lane. The gaslight flickers, and while you're still awake, you're no longer alone in it. Let's talk about what you're wearing. Yes, you there in your dimly lit Victorian bedroom, curled like a slightly overcooked shrimp beneath 4 layers of woolen bedding. Because if you think modern pajamas are uncomfortable, just wait until you wriggle your way into a Victorian sleep ensemble. You're dressed, naturally, in a nightshirt long, buttoned up to the throat, and somehow both scratchy and stifling. It's made of thick flannel, because nothing says dreamland like sweating profusely from the knees down, and beneath it, perhaps, a pair of knitted socks. Because, as any good Victorian knows, a warm foot is the gateway to a rested mind. You lie very still, trying not to rustle. Your wool blanket is heavy. Your underblanket is heavier. The mattress beneath you is ... debatable, probably filled with horsehair, straw, or, if you're posh, down feathers from geese that clearly lived lives of extreme emotional distress. But your header, yes, your poor, overburdened headrests on a pillow that is, somehow, both too soft and too firm. And that's if you're lucky enough to avoid the dreaded bolster, a long, tubular pillow Victorians used for back support, leg elevation, or mild emotional repression. Historians still argue whether these elaborate sleeping setups were medically useful or just the fever dreams of cold climate living. There are records of entire households engaging in bedtime rituals, like wrapping warm bricks in cloth and placing them at the foot of the bed. Primitive hot water bottles that doubled as foot warmers and toast calders. Let's not forget the chest. Flannel, a square of cloth pinned over your sternum, believed to protect your heart from chills and your soul from whatever spiritual draft the Victorians feared most. And if you're the anxious type which, of course, you may also don a sleep cap. Not the jaunty, pompon-tipped version from Christmas Carol illustrations, but a sad, functional bonnet meant to trap warmth and prevent nocturnal brain breezes, because, naturally, wind on the scalp was believed to cause melancholia, or toothaches, or possibly divorce. You try to adjust your cap, only to discover it slid down over one eye. Again, this was bedtime fashion in an era where comfort was mostly accidental. Clothes were layered, fastened with ties, pins, and the occasional moral judgment, and even the idea of breathable fabric hadn't quite reached the average haberdasher. Still, people believed these things mattered. That the right flannel, the right socks, the exact correct ratio of goose to cotton in your pillow could coax you into slumber. That a blanket pulled to just below the chin knot higher, never higher, might tip the scales toward rest, and you can't blame them. There was science, sort of. Doctors published charts about optimal blanket weight and the temperature of bedroom air. Some even claimed that sleeping under too many layers could result in nights of fusions, a term that sounds delightfully vague and vaguely deadly. One popular medical guide from 1858 warned against sudden disrobing of the calves, claiming it could trigger fits, insomnia, or prolonged sighing. So yes, you're leaving your socks on. Your eyes drift to the fireplace. It's gone out now, a pile of grey ash and half-charred coal. If you're wealthy, someone might come in the morning to relight it. If not, you'll wake up with the peculiar stiffness that comes from sleeping in the general shape of a sardine. The window lets in a sliver of moonlight, filtered through layers of frost and city grime. Victorian bedrooms were often drafty in purpose. The belief was that fresh air, even if freezing, helped purify the blood and settle the nerves. Many people slept with windows cracked, even in January, which is how you end up trapped in a paradox, bundled like a turnip roast, yet still shivering from the icy breeze licking your ear. You shift beneath the covers. One pillow slides askew. The cap descends again. It's not bad, exactly. There's something oddly reassuring about the sheer weight of everything. The bed is a fortress. The nightshirt, a mildly itchy hug. And the socks, still warmer than whatever the floor has in store. You let your thoughts drift to the other sleepers in your household. In the servant quarters, a young scullery maid is curled up under a single rough blanket, her bed a narrow board against the attic wall. Downstairs, your aunt snores quietly, hair still in curlers, clutching a rosary and murmuring Latin between breaths. The dog by the fireplace sleeps soundly on the rug, blanketless, hatless, and entirely at peace. You're starting to think he has the right idea. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with bedtime clothing stemmed more from health concerns or modesty. After all, mixed-gender households, even within families, required a certain level of discretion. No one wanted to see your ankles, especially not while unconscious. And yet, this very fussiness may have helped. The ritual, the wrapping, the odd little superstitions. They offered structure, predictability, a nightly routine so thorough. You were halfway to sleep by the time your final sock was secured. You shift once more. Your blankets sigh. Perhaps, you think, it's not about comfort after all. Perhaps it's about reassurance, knowing you've done every strange, woolen thing you can do on now, at last. You've earned a chance to rest. You pulled the blanket up to your chin. One sock has fallen off, but you don't care. The fire is out. The lettuce. Water is gone. And maybe your brain is ready to stop narrating itself for the night. You wake briefly. Or maybe you never really fell asleep. Realize you're hungry. Not the rumbling, emergency kind of hunger, but the weird, annoying kind that pops up at 2 a.m. when your brain is still buzzing and your stomach decides to get involved. Now, what would a proper Victorian insomniac eat to coax themselves into sleep? Let's pad quietly down the hallways, scuffing across cold wood floors, and sneak into the kitchen for a look. Don't worry, there's no refrigerator to hum or flicker. Just a heavy cupboard, maybe a pie safe, and a pantry filled with things that were boiled 2 days ago and have since gelled into unidentifiable comfort. Victorian bedtime snacks, if you could call them that, were rooted more in routine than taste. Everything revolved around digestion. If your gut was too active, you'd stay awake. Too slow, and you'd have nightmares. It was a delicate balance, and the rules were many. Your options: boiled mutton, pale, overcooked, stringy mutton served, warm if you're lucky, cold and congealed if not, often accompanied by milk toast, slices of stale bread dunked in warm milk until all texture is eliminated, then lightly salted and served with gravy. Seriousness, but here's what you came for. Pickled lettuce, yes, it's real. In some corners of Victorian cuisine, lettuce was preserved in vinegar, and spices think of it as the sleepy cousin to sauerkraut. It was said to soften the disposition and ready the humors for repose. Some doctors even claimed it aided dream smoothness, a phrase which sounds both comforting and slightly absurd. You open the jar. It smells like sadness and dill, but in you go one trembling forkful at a time. Historians still argue whether these odd meals helped or hindered sleep. Some believed in the calming powers of warm milk and simple starches. Others warned against eating too late, fearing that digestion would trap the mind in a state of restless fire. And still, Victorians persisted with their midnight meals, not out of gluttony, but ritual, reassurance, the quiet comfort of movement when the house is otherwise still. You sit at the table with your little bowl of pickled lettuce, watching the oil lamp flicker in its glass. Your chair creaks, your nose is bunched in the back, but something about the moment feels steady. There were other options, too, of course. If your budget allowed, you might have a small serving of stewed prunes, known for their moral fiber, or weak beef tea, which is somehow less satisfying than it sounds. The truly adventurous might try posset, a mixture of hot milk, ale, and eggs, curdled together into something resembling drinkable wallpaper paste. And don't forget the teas: chamomile, valerian root, and inevitably more lettuce water, because if you weren't boiling it, you were steeping it. You imagine a very tired Victorian hostess offering her guest a polite spoonful of pickled lettuce before bed. It pairs nicely with silence, she might say, and insomnia. You chuckle softly, alone in your kitchen. Oddly enough, the pickled lettuce does help, if not your brain, then your sense of ritual. Your body begins to understand the signal, the steps, the slowness of it all. You picture thousands of other sleepless souls across London doing the same, sitting in kitchens at 2 a.m., chewing listlessly, lit by the same kind of flickering lamp, all united in their efforts to digest something dinner dreams or dread. There were even books written about the correct supper for the nervous, entire chapters devoted to food that would not inflame the senses. These included boiled parsnips, plain porridge, and milk custard with nutmeg. A doctor in Edinburgh once published a full week's menu featuring nothing but mashed things, each more beige than the last dot. And while these meals may not win flavor awards, they gave people something to do, something quiet, predictable. You get the feeling that, for the Victorians, the act of preparing food was as important as consuming it. There's a strange magic to the rhythm of it, the clink of a spoon, the lift of a teacup, the exhale after a swallow, like telling your body, look, we're okay. We're not fighting or fleeing, we're just chewing pickled lettuce at midnight and hoping for the best. You stand, stretch gently, and rinse your plate. No dishwasher, no garbage disposal, just a soft cloth, a creaky pump faucet, and the faint sound of a cat outside doing something mildly ominous. Back to bed, you pass the hallway, mirror, and catch your reflection. Nightcap askew, socks mismatched, eyes glassy with semi-lettuced. Serenity, it's a look. You crawl back under the covers. The sheets are cooler now. The pillow has shifted again. But your stomach feels quiet, and your thoughts are less spiky than before. Sleep. Maybe, or maybe just a slow drift through this leafy, lukewarm world. You're back in bed now, belly lined with vinegar and boiled dairy, swaddled in flannel like a Victorian caterpillar hoping to pupate into something more rested by morning. The room is darker than it was an hour ago. Either the fire has shrunk to a polite ember, or your eyes have finally adjusted to the shadows. But you're not quite asleep. Not yet, so let's turn to a different tool in the Victorian arsenal: sound. Because while the 19th century had no Spotify, no thunderstorm playlists or tenor rain loops, the Victorians were surprisingly inventive when it came to background noise. For starters, there was the night serenade. Not the romantic kind, though you could hire a violinist to stand beneath your window if you had deep pockets and forgiving neighbors. No, these serenades were mechanical, elaborate music boxes, wind-up contraptions built to lull you with slow arias or the gentle clink of bells. They rarely lasted longer than a few minutes. Some included lullaby cylinders that played God Save the Queen at half speed, hardly relaxing, but apparently effective if you were very patriotic or very tired. One model, sold under the brand name Slumber Song, promised dream-inducing chimes tuned to the natural rhythm of a healthy heart. Historians still argue whether that was an actual thing or just excellent marketing copy. You imagine setting one beside your bed, winding it carefully with cold fingers, and listening to the delicate plinking of what might be handle, or possibly just a jammed cog pretending to be handle. It stops abruptly. You flinch every time. But let's say you couldn't afford a music box. What then? You had options. A popular method was the drone reader, someone tasked with reading you to sleep, in a slow, expressionless voice. If you had a sibling, cousin, or willing servant, you might assign them a book known to be relentlessly boring. Dry agricultural records of Norfolk, 1841, was a favorite. So was the geometry of masonry a volume so soporific it was said to put masons themselves to sleep halfway through page 4. You can almost hear it now, and in laying the fourth course of stone, one must always account for the inward angle of the foundations. ZZZ. In larger households, children were often lulled with folk stories, told in low voices by nurses whose dialects turned every bedtime into a sonic lullaby. These tales weren't necessarily soothing in content. Many involved betrayal, haunted ponds and geese with questionable intentions, but the rhythm was everything. Comfort by cadence, safety in repetition. You roll onto your side. Outside, London hums, not in the way you know cities to hum today, with sirens and traffic and neon buzzing, but with coal carts rattling over cobblestones, night watchmen calling, the hour and distant footfalls echoing off alley walls. If you were a light sleeper, these noises were either deeply familiar or deeply infuriating. Some city dwellers swore they couldn't fall asleep without the clatter of hooves or the hiss of a steam whistle in the distance. Others waged war against them. Enter the ear trumpet pillow. Yes, a pillow designed with special chambers to either muffle external sound or, conversely, funnel ambient noise toward one ear to create a soothing It was like the world's saddest podcast, another invention. The hush hood looked like an upholstered birdcage worn over the head, meant to cancel sound and promote serenity. Most users reported an increase in sleepiness and claustrophobia. You try to imagine putting a pillow on your head and lying very still, hoping no one walks in to see you impersonating a sleepy footstool. Still, even in rural areas where artificial noise was scarce, the Victorians embraced natural sound. Rain on glass, wind through hedges, the slow creak of a house settling into its beams. Some kept birds near their windows, hoping for the gentle coo of doves at dawn. Others hung shells by open windows, letting the breeze whistle through in soft, tuneful groans. A few households even suspended long ribbons or strings of beads that knocked gently together with each gust. Primitive wind chimes for the sleepless gentry. Historians still debate whether these natural sound makers were intended for relaxation or simply decoration, but for the anxious mind in a creaky bed, even the slow tap of rain could become a mantra. You listen now, your own Victorian room humming in its own way. The faint hiss of wind, a mouse behind the wainscoting, the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock 2 rooms down, slightly off time, slightly ominous, but familiar. Tick, tick, tick. You imagine focusing on it as you drift. 1, 2, 3, but then it skips. Tick, tick, and your brain resets. The whole count. Typical. Still, there's something comforting about knowing others counted these ticks before you, that generations of overthinking sleepers once stared at the ceiling, listening to the same awkward rhythm. Maybe they, too, tried holding their breath to match the sound. Maybe they, too, whispered nonsense syllables in time with the clock, convincing themselves they'd invented a sleep spell. Or maybe they, too, just lay there, waiting for morning to arrive with something resembling mercy. You exhale slowly. There's no music box tonight, no lullaby, but your room is full of sound if you listen for it. The blanket shifts, the bed frame sighs, and somewhere deep in the wood of the house, a beam contracts with a sound like a sleepy breath, not silence, but a soft, cluttered quiet, the kind you could fall asleep in eventually. You're still awake, aren't you? That's okay. So were many Victorians at this hour, though not necessarily because of insomnia. In fact, some weren't trying to sleep at all. Let's talk about something curious: segmented sleep. That's right. Victorians and many people before them didn't always aim for one long, uninterrupted slumber. Instead, they often practiced something called first sleep and second sleep. You roll onto your back and stare at the ceiling, amused. It sounds like a Lord of the Rings chapter, and thus Frodo entered the second sleep. But this was very real. First sleep typically lasted from around 9 or 10 p.m. until about 1 or 2 in the morning. Then people would wake up calmly, without panic, and stay awake for an hour or two before drifting into a second round of rest until dawn. This wakeful hour wasn't considered a failure of sleep. Quite the opposite. It was a time for reflection, prayer, writing in journals, reading moral tales, or tending to small tasks around the house. It was gentle, built into the rhythm of the night like a natural pause. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was biological or social. Some claim it was a remnant of pre-industrial lighting patterns, where firelight and natural cycles dictated rest. Others believe it was encouraged by religion and ritual time to pray or confess your dreams to a sleepy housemate, who may or may not remember it in the morning. You imagine yourself padding quietly through your gaslit home. Everyone else between their sleeps, you sit by the fire, a thin blanket wrapped around your shoulders, holding a cup of warm barley water, not because you expect it to work, but because it fills the time. You don't feel rushed. You're not scrolling through anything. You're not berating yourself for still being awake. You're simply in the middle. During this interlude, some people wrote letters, long dreamy ramblings, with flourishes they wouldn't dare try. In the daylight, others meditated. Some even took short walks outside, if it wasn't raining or full of suspicious foxes. One popular suggestion, recorded in the Household Almanac of 1863, was to use the waking hour to braid your hair, examine your conscience, or polish silver, so long as it be done in quiet joy. Quiet joy. What a lovely goal for the wee hours. In fact, doctors at the time described this in-between period as one of the most peaceful times for the brain. It wasn't considered insomnia. It was rest with awareness, a kind of liminal state slip adjacent, but full of comfort and stillness. You sit up in bed and consider this. Maybe you're not failing to sleep. Maybe you're just between sleeps. You imagine how comforting that would be if our culture hadn't wrapped up all our fears and shame in the idea of 8 unbroken hours. The Victorians would chuckle at our panic. You're meant to be up now, they'd say, pouring you a cup of steeped poppy water. Here, write your cousin a letter, or stare at the fire, or fold laundry, then sleep again, it'll come. And indeed, people did report that second sleep was often the deeper, dreamier one. It came with stranger visions, more vivid imaginings. One doctor wrote that dreams during second sleep tended toward the poetic, sometimes the prophetic, and very often toward thoughts that improved the character upon waking. You imagine journaling after second sleep. Dear diary, I've become more virtuous thanks to a dream about a talking muffin. In some households, especially among the artistic types, the mid-sleep hour was used to brainstorm. Poets would scratch lines into notebooks, confident they'd return to make sense of them. Some of them even did. You pull the covers tighter. What if, instead of waiting anxiously for sleep, you allowed this pause? Let your mind wander without pressure. Pick up a half-forgotten thought and follow it for a while, like a cat stalking shadows across the ceiling. The room has grown quieter. Even the mouse has stopped rustling. You wonder if it's between sleeps, too. There's a small thrill in embracing this forgotten rhythm, a rebellious serenity. The idea that sleeplessness might not be a malfunction, but a different kind of rest. Some scholars think the rise of segmented sleep's disappearance coincided with gas and electric lighting. Our days extended, our nights compressed. Sleep became scheduled, one long, bright rectangle in the dark. No more meandering breaks to ponder the geometry of teacups or imagine lettuce leaves reading you poetry. Historians still debate how common segmented sleep truly was. The evidence comes from diaries, letters, medical journals. No one wrote, "Hey diary, I'm awake again for my normal 1 a.m. chat with the cat," but the clues are there, hidden in language. First sleep, morning slumber, midnight wakefulness. You wonder what we lost when we made sleep linear, when we labeled waking up at 2 a.m. as failure instead of tradition. Tonight, though, you're honoring it. No panic, no blue light, no stress, just stillness. You stare at the ceiling. And then, perhaps, you don't. Perhaps your eyes close, not tightly, not deliberately, but like curtains drifting in an evening breeze. First sleep is behind you, and second sleep, it's waiting just out of sight. The fire has gone completely out now. You can tell by the way the cold has crept back into your toes, like a polite but persistent butler reminding you that the house was never truly warm to begin with. The chill isn't sharp, though it's more of a suggestion, a soft tap on the shoulder from the past, inviting you to think about how Victorians handled the night's cold. Let's follow that thread for a while, shall we? Because sleeping in the 1800s wasn't just about falling asleep. It was about surviving the night temperature without becoming a very cozy popsicle. For starters, there was the bed warmer. You've seen one, maybe in a museum or your great-aunt's guest room, a brass pan with a long handle, like a weaponized pancake skillet. Inside, embers or hot coals. A servant or family member would swish the pan gently between the sheets just before bed, warming the space with a dry, smoky heat. But you had to be careful. Too much heat and the sheets could scorch. Too little and you'd be lulled into a false sense of toastiness, only to be ambushed by a freezing pillowcase at 3A.M.1. Doctor in 1862 warned against reckless warming, claiming it caused feverish dreams and unnecessary agitation of the spleen. You're not sure what spleen agitation feels like, but it sounds unpleasant, of course. For those without brass pans or spleens worth agitating, there were other tools, like the hot brick method. You take a regular brick, yes, a brick heat. It's by the hearth, then wrap it in flannel or an old towel and slip it to the foot of the bed. It radiates just enough warmth to trick your feet into thinking you live somewhere reasonable. Like Spain, historians still argue whether this technique worked better than the bedpan method. Some households swore by bricks, others feared the lingering smell of scorched flannel. Still others claimed they couldn't tell the difference because they were too busy worrying about rats. You shift your imaginary brick a little closer to your toes. Yes, that's better. We should also talk about bed curtains, not just for show. These heavy drapes surrounding the bed weren't there to signal wealth or hide nighttime snacking. They were practical, a way to trap your body heat inside a tiny cave of semi-warmth. Climb inside your four-poster canopy. Pull the curtains tight. Congratulations, you now sleep in your own low-budget sauna, but the air gets stuffy. The breath of 1,000 previous nights clings to the fabric, and occasionally You're not alone in their spider, perhaps, or a moth that wandered in and decided it likes Dickens, too. Still, there's a cozy pleasure in this little cocoon, in knowing that no gust of wind, no nighttime draft can find you here, unless, of course, your sibling opens the curtain just to check if you're asleep and releases all the trapped heat in one icy swoosh. You forgive them eventually. It takes time. And then there were the beds, themselves huge wooden contraptions with high posts and thick mattresses stuffed with horsehair, feathers, straw, or whatever soft thing could be reasonably acquired without upsetting too many farm animals. Some mattresses sagged like soup. Others were as stiff as a church pew. You never really knew what you were getting until you flopped down and disappeared 3 inches into an unexpected crater. Still, the layering system made up for it. Victorians didn't have duvets as we know them. Instead, they stacked sheets, counterpanes, quilts, and sometimes a cloak or two on top for good measure. It was less about aesthetics and more about thermal survival. Like layering sweaters on your dreams. You imagine the weight of it, all blankets pressing gently into your chest like a sleepy bear, anchoring your thoughts. It's oddly reassuring, and it's not just the physical cold they were fending off, it was also the emotional cold of the era. Loneliness, grief, fear of disease or financial ruin. When you've got no electric light, no radio, no Twitter to distract you, nighttime becomes louder, which is why, for many Victorians, the act of bundling up body and soul was as much psychological as practical. You weren't just warming your feet, you were wrapping yourself in routine, in expectation, in the hope that morning would come and you'd still be there to greet it if slightly flattened by your own quilt pile. Some families even developed superstitions around their bedding. One tale from Yorkshire warned that sleeping with your left foot uncovered would invite chill spirits, a kind of ghostly draught with a strong opinion on sock etiquette. Another warned that using more than 3 pillows was an affront to humility, which is ironic given that Queen Victoria herself reportedly slept with 7. You glance at your single pillow and feel appropriately humble. There's something beautiful about it, though the care, the rituals, the belief that sleep was something to be prepared for, as one might prepare for a voyage or a nap in an unusually hostile meadow. And so, in the darkness of your imagined room, you shift under your invisible layers, nudge your feet toward your imaginary brick, and pull the curtains. Closed in your mind, it's quiet again. Cold outside. Warm here, you breathe, and slowly your bones begin to forget
By now,
what time
your
it
body
is tucked in just right. Your pillow has accepted its fate. The nightshirt has stopped twisting. Even the imaginary brick at your feet is holding steady heat, and yet your mind still wanders. Victorians, of course, knew this. Feeling well. They didn't just try to sleep, they tried to manage their thoughts. And when pickled lettuce, warm bricks, and midnight toast failed them, they turned to something both surprisingly modern and deeply peculiar. Sleep journals and dream logs. You sit up slightly just enough to imagine opening a drawer, pulling out a leather-bound notebook and a stub of pencil. Or maybe it's already under your pillow, next to your camphor, sachet, and that oddly shaped button you keep meaning to sew back on. Sleep journaling, for the Victorians, wasn't just about recording dreams. It was about cataloguing sleep itself. How long it lasted, what interrupted it, whether the vapours of supper interfered again, and whether the cat's sudden affection at 3 a.m. might be a portent of ill omen or just a chilly cat. One Woman's log from 1847 includes such entries as woke from first sleep at 1:37 by thunder. Read Proverbs. Took 2 spoonfuls of treacle water. Returned to second sleep by 2:14. Dreamed of a walnut with human teeth. You flip to your own imaginary page. What would you write? Woke due to vague anxiety and toe cramp. Thought about taxidermy for some reason. Fell asleep imagining a duel between 2 overly polite librarians. Perfect. These journals weren't purely whimsical. Many Victorians believed dreams held meaning divine, medical, or emotional. A dream of water might suggest a coming change. A dream of falling, indigestion. A dream of Queen Victoria herself. Best not to mention that some even consulted dream. Dictionaries, popular at the time, that interpreted common images in exhaustively specific ways. Dreaming of a cow. Prosperity, dreaming of 3 cows. A journey, dreaming of a cow inside your house. Consider moving, but more than interpretation, journaling was a way to quiet the mind, to offload thoughts into ink before they spun too fast to sleep. Think of it as a bedtime dump of feelings and idle nonsense, pre-Freud and utterly unfiltered. Historians still argue whether this habit was genuinely useful or just another form of obsessive Victorian self-documentation. The same people who tracked their bowel movements and pulse rates with eerie dedication also measured sleep in ways that would make your Fitbit blush. One journal describes an experiment with a self-made somnodiary that included a wax cylinder. Voice recorder, early ASMR, if you will. The author whispers groggily into it, dreamed of a biscuit turning into a judge, had feelings of guilt or pastry. Then there's a thud as he presumably dropped the recorder onto his cat. You smile at the image. In fact, even children were encouraged to keep dream journals. Notebooks with gilded edges and covers embossed with moon phases, often titled Nocturnes or Visions. They were given as gifts, along with instructions to record not just dreams, but bedtime thoughts, nighttime fears, and the quality of one's repose. And sometimes, the mere act of writing was enough to tire the brain, to turn whirling thoughts into sleepy doodles. Several journal entries from 1853 end mid-sentence, as though the author nodded off in the middle of a word. You imagine the final page just reads, "Thought I heard the dresser sigh. Or was it gone, you lie?" Back again, in your mind's eye, the dream journal waits on the nightstand, open, ready, non-judgmental, full of nonsense. And yet, comforting, even if you don't write in it, it feels like you did. Some insomniacs even took to pre-dream scripting a technique, where you'd tell yourself what kind of dream you wanted before sleep, like ordering takeout for your subconscious. Walk by a lake, a reunion with a long-gone pet, a ballroom full of lavender where everyone speaks in bird calls. You try it now. I will dream of a bakery. You whisper to no one, where all the cakes are polite and never melt. It's a start. There were other tools too. Some writers recommended drawing your dream before it faded, though most drawings from this era look like melting potatoes with eyes. Still, the intent was there. Capture the night, tame it, wrap it in a story so it doesn't start wrapping you. And if journaling didn't work, some simply reread past entries, proof that they'd survived other sleepless nights, that even when sleep refused to arrive on time, it always came eventually. Your thoughts soften. You picture your own sleep journal, maybe illustrated with badly drawn sheep, or one recurring dream about a staircase that leads directly into a teapot. Maybe it's not important what you write, only that your brain feels heard, that someone, even yourself, is paying attention. And with that, your mind lets go a little, the thoughts slow. Your imaginary pencil rolls off the edge of your pillow, and sleep, at last, starts turning the page. You're deeper now, not quite dreaming, but drifting, that syrupy middle space where everything feels like a memory from a book you never finished. But then, a breeze slips through the window, the imaginary one, of course, and your eyes open. Just enough to remember where you are. Still in bed, still Victorian, still mildly amused, and just a little too awake. So let's talk about what the Victorians did when sleep absolutely refused to come. When you'd pickled all the lettuce you could, drained the valerian tea to its last leaf, recorded every dream involving biscuits or horses, and yet the moon kept dragging its pale fingers across your window. That's when things got strange. Enter electrotherapy for sleeplessness. Yes, before there were white noise apps, there were devices designed to zap the insomnia right out of you. Gently, of course. Most of the time, these curious inventions, often housed in polished wooden boxes with brass knobs and velvet linings, promise to restore the natural nervous rhythm through galvanic balance, which is Victorian, for we have no idea how this works, but doesn't it look scientific? You imagine one now on your nightstand, a little humming contraption with wires and paddles, gently buzzing beside your candle. The instructions read something like, apply the electrodes to the temples. If the eyes twitch uncontrollably, reduce the dial by half a turn. Repeat until drowsiness occurs or supper repeats. Historians still argue whether these machines had any real effect or were just Victorian placebos dressed in clockwork cosplay. Some patients swore they could feel their thoughts being quieted at the source. Others claimed it gave them dreams of purple geometry, which sounds either terrifying or delightful, depending on your opinion of math, of course. If you didn't want to plug yourself into an electrical mood adjuster, there were subtler methods, like the sleeping hat, not the frilly Dickensian kind, though those were real and profoundly pointy, but the therapeutic pressure bonnet, a tight-fitting head wrap filled with herbs, seeds, or sometimes sand. It compressed the scalp slightly, under the theory that a gently squeezed brain would quiet down, like a fussy baby in a swad. No studies confirmed this. But then again, you've probably fallen asleep in weirder positions. Some took too hypnotic. Suggestion, the early form of sleep hypnosis, minus the YouTube loops and soothing Australian accents. Victorian hypnotists were sometimes hired to recite calming phrases to the sleepless, using repetition, candlelight, and the occasional swinging pocket watch. You picture it now. Your eyelids are heavy, very heavy, as heavy as your aunt's. Pudding. Not exactly clinical, but it did the trick. Occasionally, when all else failed, you might receive a prescription from your local apothecary, pharmacist/wizard offering concoctions with names like Dr. Featherby's Nocturnal Balsam or Lady Bellington's Syrup of Settling. Ingredients were often mysterious, but a few favorites included laudanum, a cheerful mix of alcohol and opium, chloral hydrate, like a drowsy cousin of chloroform, bromide salts to tame the frayed nerves. You won't be surprised to hear that many of these remedies were a little too effective. Users often reported oversleeping into the lunch hour or waking up in entirely different towns. Having purchased a goat they did not remember meeting. It's no wonder people eventually started asking if there might be safer solutions. That's When spiritual sleep aids entered the mix, some Victorians believed sleeplessness wasn't physical, but moral, that an unquiet soul would keep the body restless, like a kettle left on a low simmer. Clergy began writing pamphlets titled, "The Soul's Midnight Rattle and Slumber as Reward for the Righteous." One even recommended whispering psalms backward, until sleep came. Another suggested writing a list of every person you had wronged, in chronological order. You imagine many Insomniacs choosing to just stay awake at that point. But it wasn't all guilt and ghostly prayers. There were soothing rituals too, folding and refolding the same handkerchief, counting backwards from 500 in French, a trick designed more to confuse the brain into boredom than to educate, or gently tapping your own forehead in rhythm with the ticking clock of practice called temporal entrainment, now known as being very bored and very tired. You might also recite a litany of soft words: blanket, moon, chimney, candle, pillow, cloud, shelf, repeating them until one word melted into the next, and your mouth forgot how to form the shapes. Even sleepwalking, usually seen as a problem, was in some circles considered a sign of deep creative sensitivity. If you wandered at night down staircases, into parlors, once into a cold pantry, and ate half a stick of butter, you were not disturbed. You were poetically out of sync. That's one way to spin it. Still awake? That's okay. You're in good company. Generations before you whispered nonsense words into velvet night, counted crooked sheep, zapped their temples with copper wires, and fell asleep mid-diary entry. Not all of it worked, but some of it did, and even now, wrapped in your imaginary woolen blankets, lying on your slightly too firm mattress beside your questionable hot brick and very judgmental sleep journal, you can feel the logic behind it all. The human need to try, to invent ways to rest, to build little bridges from consciousness to dream. And maybe, just maybe, you're already halfway across one, at this point in the night where even the ghosts have stopped bothering to rattle things. You're still tucked under layers of imagined wool, your dream journal gently flutters shut, and somewhere nearby the Victorian version of a cat's eyes, contentedly in its sleep, and yet your brain, bless it, is still politely awake. But don't worry, you're not alone. There was one more tactic Victorians turned to in the deepest hours of sleeplessness: sleep by distraction. When your mind refused to shut up about everything from overdue correspondence with your cousin Eliza to whether cabbages could ever be sent by post, the goal wasn't to fight the thoughts, it was to drown them out, lovingly, gently, boringly, which leads us to the underrated world of Victorian sleep math. Yes, sleep math. Some books recommended mentally calculating the number of tiles in the roof. Others suggested estimating the number of cups of tea consumed in the empire per day. One particularly ambitious guide asked readers to recreate in the mind the entire timetabling of the London omnibus service, even more famously, counting sheep. But not just any sheep. These were British sheep, civilized, orderly, with good posture and perhaps modern cows. You imagined them hopping fences like accountants filing paperwork one by one, never in a rush. Some versions added complexity. Each sheep wore a number. Every 5th sheep sneezed. Every 12th carried a basket. It became less about sleep and more about livestock inventory. You try it now. 1, 2, 3. Wait, was that basket lined with lace? 2. Interesting. Start over. Victorians believed that occupying the analytical part of the brain would distract The emotional part just long enough for sleep to tiptoe in and drape a blanket over the whole operation. Essentially, your brain wears itself out, solving a made-up problem, like doing math until the chalkboard falls over. Another technique, imaginary architecture. You mentally build a house, brick by brick, room by room, wallpaper pattern by wallpaper pattern. You pick the color of the front door, choose the creak of the stairs, select which hallway has the hidden bookshelf. Historians still debate whether this technique originated in monastic traditions or just came from very lonely wallpaper designers. But it worked. The more detail you added, the less room there was for anxious thoughts to wander. You imagine it now. A long, low Victorian house. Gas lamps flicker. The curtains are drawn. You step through each room: nursery, kitchen, conservatory. Each with its own smell, its own chair, its own perfectly boring story. You don't live there. You just visit when sleep refuses to answer the door, and if architecture failed, you could turn to droning recitations. Many people memorized long passages, poems, even shipping schedules, to recite silently. It wasn't about meaning. It was about rhythm. One woman in 1889 reportedly lulled herself by listing all the counties of England alphabetically and then by population. Twice. That's commitment or desperation or both. And if you're not into math, lists, or real estate, there was the phantasmagoric technique, letting images drift across your mental screen without guiding them. Think of it as Victorian Netflix screensaver mode. You don't judge the thoughts. You just let them wander in and out. A wheelbarrow, a chicken wearing spectacles, the word muffin in Gothic script, a river flowing backward, a door that leads to last Tuesday. Your mind becomes a sleepy theater, flickering with dreams in waiting. You are both audience and usher, quietly collecting the last programs while the projector hums. Victorian sleep experts encouraged this gentle detachment. Not total mindfulness too trendy, but something closer to aimless noticing. A kind of mental loitering in the hallway between waking and sleep and still. Some people preferred the physical approach. Rocking beds, yes, actual adult-sized beds, designed to sway back and forth like cribs. Some were manual. Others used water tanks or pendulums. One was attached to a pulley system operated by a long-suffering spouse in the next room. You imagine it now, your entire bed gliding slowly forward and back, floor creaking, the walls shifting slightly as if agreeing with your decision to just give up and let gravity do the work. Even more absurd, the rotating bed. Invented in 1877, it spun gently on a central axis to simulate the passage of time and confuse the agitated mind into compliance. You wonder how many people accidentally launched themselves across the room by over-cranking it. Historians remain baffled that these beds weren't more popular, possibly due to nausea, or possibly because the average Victorian bedroom simply didn't have enough space for spinning furniture and 3 layers of drapery. Still, the point remains. When sleep wouldn't come, distraction did. Not flashy, not desperate, just small mental rituals. Counting, listing, imagining, floating. The kind of things we now recreate with apps and guided meditations, but which, back then, came naturally in the quiet, firelit dark. You don't need anything fancy. You can count Victorian teaspoons, if you like, or design the world's sleepiest opera, or just listen to the sound of your own breath brushing past your upper lip, like a slow fan made of nothing at all. There's no quiz, no wrong way, just time, and somewhere in the middle of one of your lists or between sheep, 29 and 30 you may forget the count entirely, which honestly is there's a hush in the room now, a hush inside your mind. Too like the house has settled into itself. The thoughts aren't gone, exactly, but they've curled up in corners, tucked under quilts, tired of chasing themselves in circles. If you're still here, still listening, then maybe you'd like to hear how the Victorians romanticized sleep in their literature and art. Because for all their odd inventions and dubious sleep tonics, they were, at heart, great dreamers. To them, sleep wasn't just a necessity, it was a theme, a metaphor, a thing to be painted, written about, pondered in poems by gaslight. You pull the blanket up under your chin. Let's begin with the painters. Victorian artists loved painting sleepers, pale, peaceful figures in flowing white nightgowns, slumped in chairs, sprawled across antique divans, or nestled into beds surrounded by wilting flowers and open books. Sleep symbolized many things: virtue, escape, death, even spiritual transcendence. You imagine a painting now, a young woman asleep beneath a canopy bed, her hand trailing over the side, where a small dog naps with equal gravity. There's a candle, burnt to a stub, a book half open, and a faint, ghostly suggestion of dreams drawn across the wallpaper. Maybe a tree, maybe a ship. Historians still argue whether these scenes were meant to depict literal sleep, or the metaphorical kind, dreams as freedom, as rebellion, as longing for something unreachable in the stiff corsets of Victorian day life. But it wasn't just paintings. Victorian poetry is practically dripping with sleep references. Lord Tennyson, Christina Rossetti, and even Lewis Carroll filled their verses with dozing shepherds, midnight thoughts, and the blurred edge between waking and not. In fact, Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is one long exploration of sleep logic. Things making sense until they suddenly don't. Rules bending gently like warm taffy. You might even say the entire book is a dream journal in disguise. One poem by Rossetti describes a girl falling asleep while sewing, her needle slipping, not with pain, but peace. A metaphor, of course, but also a real hazard if you're dozing with embroidery in hand. Even Victorian lullabies carried this dreamy idealism. You'd think they'd be all nursery rhymes and gentle rocking, but no. Many were strangely philosophical. Consider Sleep, Baby, Sleep, a lullaby in which the stars are sheep, the heavens are pastures, and God is an eternally watchful shepherd. No pressure, little baby, just eternal cosmic metaphors overhead. Others were even more somber, describing sleep as the cousin of death, a velvet corridor to eternity, or the moment God folds you like laundry. Comforting, questionable, but beautifully written. You let those lines drift across your thoughts. A velvet corridor to eternity. You can practically see it lined with gas lamps. Hushed as a cathedral, the carpet plush beneath your dream feet. You walk it slowly, holding a candle that never drips. And at the far end, maybe nothing, maybe a featherbed, maybe something you forgot you loved. Literature, too. Explored insomnia with sympathy and sly wit in Charlotte Bronte's Via. The main character describes lying awake while the night spread about me like a sea, and my thoughts became fish. There's something deliciously accurate about that teach, thought flickering just out of reach, darting away when you try to catch it. Other Victorian novels showed sleeplessness as a badge of passion. If your hero tossed and turned all night, it wasn't indigestion, it was love. If your heroine wandered the house at 2 a.m., she wasn't avoiding sleep. She was suffering nobly. You imagine pacing the hallway in your nightgown, candle in hand, whispering to yourself, "What is sleep? If he does not dream of me." Before stubbing your toe on a misplaced footstool, there was even a whole genre of night pieces. Short essays or meditations written specifically for and about the late hours, often melancholy, sometimes hopeful, always tinged with that special kind of introspection only moonlight can cause. One such piece, by Thomas de Quincey, was called The Pains of Sleep, which sounds rather dramatic, but is surprisingly tender. He writes of lying awake, not with dread, but with strange thoughts, uninvited memories, and a solitude that felt like velvet turned inside out. You turn that phrase over in your mind. Velvet turned inside out, yes. That's what these hours feel like, don't they? Familiar, but odd. Soft, but a little itchy. Quiet, but with echoes. The Victorians understood that. They were fascinated with the psychology of night, and not just in a clinical way, but poetically, reverently. They knew that when the world quieted, the mind became louder, but not necessarily crueler. Sometimes the thoughts were simply more honest, stripped of distractions, sharpened by candlelight. And that's what sleep became in their art, not a passive state, but an adventure. A world in which everything changed just slightly. Softer edges, stranger logic, a dream of life instead of life itself. So now, in your room real or imagined, you lie there, letting those echoes from the past drift into your ears. Verses written by gaslight, paintings of dreams no one could quite explain. The hush of night filling every blank space like ink. You don't have to analyze it. You don't have to make sense of it. Just know that others long ago, awake too, not always afraid, not always sad, just awake and curious, and slowly, gently, even those poets found rest. So will you. You've made it through the lists and the brick warmers, the lettuce and lullabies, and now you lie in that soft candle-dim space where the difference between sleep and story is barely noticeable. Here's where the Victorians got even more creative, you see, in the rare moments when nothing worked, not the poetry, not the dream journals, not even the hatful of sand people, still craved comfort in company. And so a curious custom arose in some households, especially in close-knit families and boarding houses, the bedroom companion monologue. Now, this wasn't a conversation, heaven forbid, that might keep both of you awake. No, it was more like bedtime storytelling, but inverted. One person would speak softly, almost rhythmically, about anything and everything without much structure, while the other just drifted. It was part confessional, part ambient noise, part guided nap. Imagine this, your sister or friend or great-uncle Harold sitting beside the bed, murmuring about the day's errands, or what Mrs. Trumbull said at the market, or whether turnips could be considered handsome. And somewhere in there, sleep would arrive, unannounced and unimpressed. It wasn't just charming, it was effective. The practice had names like sleep whispering or wool gathering aloud. Some called it the murmur method. A few accounts from 1885 describe elderly relatives taking turns delivering bedtime rambles to restless grandchildren, often starting with, "Now, I don't expect you to listen closely, just let my voice keep you company," which is very much what you're doing right now. In fact, historians still argue whether this tradition predates Victorian times or was merely a symptom of shared sleeping arrangements, when half the household dozed in a single room. Either way, it's oddly beautiful. The notion that just talking could help someone else let go of their thoughts, You might have done it yourself. Talked someone to sleep without meaning to, drifting through anecdotes about biscuit tins and train schedules, never quite finishing a sentence, until your voice became part of the furniture, like a chair creaking, like the tick of a wall clock, like comfort dressed as rambling. There were even books written in that style, gentle nonsense essays, published under titles like Evening Thoughts for the Mildly Restless, or The Hour of Drowsy Consideration, not plot-heavy, not overly moral, just musings on clouds, on spoons, on the correct arrangement of pies in a display window. You don't read them so much as let them wash over you, and the content didn't matter, really. A good sleep monologue could be about absolutely nothing, as long as it wandered slowly and politely refused to get to the point. So let's do a little of that now. Imagine a shelf, a very dusty shelf, and on it 12 teacups, none of which match. One has a tiny chip. One has a flower painted on the inside, where no one sees it. One is far too large and was clearly meant for soup. But someone once drank tea out of it anyway and declared it bracing. Each cup has a story, but we won't tell them just yet. Next to the shelf, a coat rack, on which hangs a single woolen scarf, striped in odd colors, like someone tried to knit a rainbow but got distracted halfway through. The fringe is knotted, not on purpose. On the floor, a slipper that does not belong to anyone currently living, and beside that, a rug so old it has forgotten what it used to be. You see, nothing important, nothing urgent, just things. Safe, small things that live inside a home that lives inside a mind that's nearly asleep. Victorians loved rooms like this, mental rooms. They even described them in novels. One character in an 1870s story claims she keeps a mind parlor for sleepless nights, where she imagines dusting imaginary shelves and rearranging imaginary apples. Another claimed to inventory every button in her sewing box, slowly, alphabetically, by emotional value. Imagine sorting your buttons into piles, like buttons that feel honest or buttons that remind me of fog. You might not finish, but then again, that's the point, the act of gently listing, of observing things with no expectation of outcome. That was the magic. Even the most anxious Victorian minds, plagued by everything from unpaid debts to news of distant wars, found peace in describing a single window or a single coat hook over and over again until language itself became sleep-shaped. It's a kind of surrender, not to nothingness, but to stillness, to boredom elevated to an art, to the idea that not everything must be solved before you rest. So here, tonight, you imagine your own sleep monologue. You whisper about wallpaper, about clouds shaped like violins, about the sound a spoon makes when it stirs nothing, and even if no one else is listening, maybe your brain is, maybe it's heard enough now to stop spinning. Maybe it's preparing your final thought for the night, not profound, not final, just a soft comma in the sentence, and with that, the talking quiets, the shelf fades, the scarf unknots itself, gently, like a yawn. There's a special kind of silence that arrives just before sleep. Not the silence of absence, but the kind full of presence where the room seems to exhale with you, and even the tick of an imagined clock takes on a slower, softer rhythm. You've come a long way tonight, from pickled lettuce to poetic lullabies, from electric bonnets to mental shelf inventories, and now you find yourself, like so many Victorians before you, lying in bed, not quite asleep, but close. This last section isn't meant to explain. anything. It's simply here to offer one final resting place for your thoughts, and perhaps, just perhaps, to tell you about one more thing the Victorians tried when all else failed: listening to the house. That's right, there are written accounts, entries, letters, newspaper columns, describing a nightly practice of simply lying still and observing the sounds of the home settling. The creak of stairs, the groan of old pipes, the sigh of wind against shutters, even the rhythmic drip from a poorly sealed window. These were not annoyances. They were familiar, predictable, reassuring, in the way that only old things can be. Some even gave names to the sounds. One woman referred to the soft whistle in her fireplace as the parlor ghost. A man swore the beam above his bed made a noise that sounded like Mr. Thistlewhip snoring from the attic. Neither ghost nor man existed, but both sounds helped them fall asleep. You can try it now. What do you hear in the stillness? Perhaps it's the slow breath of a sleeping neighborhood, the sound of fabric shifting, a dog 3 houses down turning once, then again, before giving up and sleeping like the rest of us. You listen, not to judge, not to react, just to notice this. Practice, simple as it is, was considered a kind of domestic mindfulness. The home as companion, the walls as lullaby. There's a reason so many Victorian stories end not with drama, but with someone quietly retiring for the evening, often accompanied by the phrase, "and all was still." It's a phrase you can carry with you. All was still. Not perfect, not silent, just still, and that's enough. Even the things you didn't get done today, the unanswered messages, the small annoyances, the items still sitting on the imaginary to-do list, none of them are going anywhere. But they're also not going to barge into this quiet moment, because this moment is yours. You picture your room, the real one or the one you've invented tonight. Your bed, the covers, maybe there's a small flickering oil lamp on the bedside, table, or maybe it's the warm glow of a digital clock. Doesn't matter. In either case, the light is low, the night has fully settled, and your body is ready to follow. The Victorians might not have figured out the perfect sleep solutions, certainly not with lettuce or galvanic wires or loquacious sheep, but they did understand the value of ritual, of tucking yourself into the evening with kindness, of giving your thoughts somewhere safe to go, while the rest of you rests. They knew that sleep wasn't about forcing the mind to stop. It was about gently nudging it toward something softer, and that's what you've done here. So, here at the end of our little journey together, let's slow down even more. Let your muscles sink just a bit deeper. Let your eyes, already half closed, forget how to stay open. Let your breathing match the pace of a slow-turning page, flipping in the breeze from a window that might not even be open. We've reached the quiet part now, the part where stories stop and dreams begin. So go ahead, close your imaginary journal, snuff the candle, let the last words melt away. You're ready. You've always been, and now, sleep can take it from here. Word count 1095, wind down 300 words, and now, dear listener, the night belongs to you. There's nothing left to do, nowhere else to be. The world has spun itself a little slower just for you, softening every edge, quieting every ticking clock until all that's left is this deep, comfortable stillness. Let your thoughts float now, light as dust motes in a sunbeam, drifting slowly down. There's no need to chase them, just let them pass. Tonight's journey through the sleepy corners of Victorian life, through steam-heated pillows, dream journals, and herbal sleep hats was never really about facts. It was about making space. In your mind, in your body, in your breath. Space to relax, space to rest. And as you lie there now, safe and still, know that you're part of something timeless, one of countless people across centuries who've lain awake, not in fear, but in quiet curiosity, waiting for dreams to take the reins. You don't have to try anymore. You're already where you need to be, so let your breath deepen, let the weight of the blankets hold you, and let this moment stretch into the kind of sleep that feels like warm water, like soft flannel, like the gentle hush of pages closing in a favorite old book. You've done enough. You are enough. Sleep well. Dream kindly, and I'll see you next time.